Well, thanks for joining me and welcome to yet another PIPN webinar on how to find solutions for helping chronic pain. So the first two in this series was on the meaning and the purpose of pain. And just as a quick review, we dived into the meaning can lead to a different expectation, because often we get lost in this world of trying to get rid of our pain. And it's a very challenging thing to do. But when we look at the meaning of pain and the lessons from that, I believe we can bring forward purpose and therefore allow the journey with this to be an enriching experience for not just yourself, but the other people in your life. The next webinar I talked about was about habits. And the reason for that is I did spend 4 webinars, and it's available on the website, looking at different activities that we can do to optimize our chronic pain state. But what is the use of all the knowledge if it's not integrated into ourself? And the purpose of that webinar was to bring the concept of habits into your life and to make it a habit, and therefore have success moving forward with this chronic pain journey. So today I'm moving on to the subject of breathing. And I've entitled this, Breathing Your Greatest Tool. And the reason for that is it is the thing that we do the most in our life. It's quite an interesting concept. So we're going to dive into this a little bit more in depth. There's a small section on this on the initial 4 webinars, and just literally a few minutes spent, but we're going to spend about half an hour or so, and then with questions, and I'll be here for the live questions and answers following this recorded webinar. So first, the history. Let's go back in time. Your life began on this planet Earth when you came through the birth canal, or you were born by C-section, and you took your first grasp. And at that moment, air and oxygen changed everything. Physiologically inside, your heart literally changed. You were a water mammal at that point, and you became an air-breathing mammal. There's lots of changes that happened literally in the heart and the lungs, because you started to use air from the oxygen from the air versus oxygen and air, oxygen from your mum. So there's a lot of changes went into the lungs. I won't go into the details of that, but the first grasp was pivotal. For some who struggle in birth, resuscitation is done. And the focus of that is to get oxygen into the body. And then we have infants who are natural belly breathers or abdominal breathers. If any of you have got kids or grandkids, you remember back when these little babies were breathing with their belly moving up and down. You could see them in the cot, see them in the bed. Childhood, we begin to become upper lung breathers. And I think that's around the age of 2, when the personality starts to develop, the terrible 2s. So you start to breathe differently and go into adult life. You and I right now, most of us, excuse me, that was my son in the background doing his homework. Most of us in the adult experience breathe with the upper part of our lungs. Very shallow breathing for most of us. And that is a response to the fight flight, or a response with the fight flight affecting how we're breathing. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. And we go forward in life, we come to the end of our life, there's something called chain-stoked breathing, which is an irregularity of the breath. Slow, and then pausing for long periods of time, and then fast, shallow breathing, and then it slows down again and it's prolonged. If anybody's had the opportunity to witness a loved one passing, then you may have experienced this. But as a physician for 20 years now, I've seen a lot of that change stoking. And that's just the part of the brain that's actually down regulating, it's closing down. And in the final moments of our life, we actually stop breathing. And that's the end of our life journey. So that's your history with breathing. So let's talk more about the physiology. What actually happens when you breathe? Why is it so important? Well, we take in air, which is about 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. And literally, the oxygen comes in and the carbon dioxide goes out. Oxygen, when it comes into your body, is brought all around brought into the lungs, into the vascular system, into the arterial blood supply, and it's pumped out to every part of your body through the aorta and then the smaller blood vessels. These big blood vessels reduce into arterioles, which are small arteries, and then even smaller blood vessels called capillaries. And it's in the capillaries that there's an exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So oxygen comes into the cell, and then carbon dioxide comes out of the cell into the bloodstream, then becomes small veins or venules, into bigger veins, and then into the biggest vein, and back into the heart. Then it goes through the lungs and gets oxygenated again. So that is the circulatory system where you get oxygenated and your body lives on oxygen. So one other thing to be mentioned on this, and I'll tie it in, is carbon dioxide is not only is it a waste product that's removed from the body, we breathe it out, but it's also there to dilate the blood vessels. And I'll be talking about a few techniques at the end of this and how to optimize the dilatation or opening up of your blood vessels that will literally start to help get more oxygen into your cells. Okay. Now, I mentioned the fight-flight response at the beginning. I would say my experience in the office with all my patients over the years, I would say there was only a handful of people, so we're talking less than 1%, when I asked them about breathing and we talked about breathing, that I could actually witness them breathing from the base of the lungs or from the diaphragm. And they were consciously doing that when I asked them to breathe. But most of us, if we just start to look at how we're breathing, and I put my hand up also within this group, is we actually breathe from the top of our lungs. And that is a less efficient way of optimizing the most important thing to survive, and that is breathing. So about 98% or 99% are living in this fight-flight response. So let's talk about the fight-flight. I mentioned it a lot in my initial webinars. The body gets ready to act. Now, the brain and the body are connected, and the body and the brain is connected, okay? And in a chronic pain state, what is happening is your body sends signals up that there's a problem called pain. And the brain's response is, I know how to fix that. We're going to fight the problem. We're going to flight or run away. Sometimes we freeze or we collapse. So these are 4 physiological responses that your body has when it's in a fight-flight response. It's part of the autonomic nervous system, and it's the sympathetic part of that system, or the sympathetic drive. And it's also related to your hormones like cortisol and adrenaline being pumped out, like a chronic stress response. So stress response, pain response, fight-flight response, are all the same thing. So physiologically, this is going on in our lives. And I would say about 98% of us are shallow breathing because there's a fight-flight response in us. And in this situation, the conscious brain, the neocortex, which is the part to do with the top of your brain, you've got three main parts of the brain. You've got the neocortex, which is the large part. In evolutionary terms, that's the part that's evolved in the latter hundreds of thousands of years. And it's to do with planning and thinking and executive functions is a way of describing it. The logic of us, you know. And then you got the central part of the brain, which is the limbic system. And that's involved with emotion and thought, and also other things like your chronic pain response, your control of your breathing through the autonomic nervous system and the other systems, like memory and learning, and also sleep. It's the part of the brain that controls the pituitary gland, which is the master endocrine or hormonal gland in the body, and also the hypothalamus, which feeds into the pituitary gland. So your hormones are controlled in this part called the limbic system. And the third brain, if you want to call it that, reptilian brain, is the brain stem, which is right at the top of your spine, or the bottom of your brain, and it feeds down into your spinal cord. And that's automatically controls your breathing and your temperature and your metabolic rate. And that aspect is 24/7, continually working unconsciously. So what happens in a chronic pain state? It's almost like the thinking part of the brain is shut down. It's not working. And then you get the automatic responses, the emotional responses, the thinking responses, and also the control of the functions of the body, all automatic. And in a pain state, we are disconnected from the brain to the body. And therefore, we just breathe shallow in a fight-flight sense. You know, other things that can happen in this state is the blood is taken away from the skin, and it's directed to the most important organs, like your brain, your heart, your muscles, because you get ready to run away. And also your pupils dilate, and also you get a more active activity of the bladder and the bowel. Worst case scenarios, incontinence can happen. But for most people, that doesn't happen. But essentially, all this system is reducing our blood flow to our body, reducing our oxygenation to our body because the breathing is shallow. And it's been said that if you're not really breathing, you're not really living. Now, that's an interesting quote. Just take a moment to think about that. If you're not really breathing, you're not really living. And I would encourage you to focus on this number one activity of staying alive. And that's my hope for you today, is when you leave this webinar, you're going to reflect on this. You're going to think about this. And I'm going to give you some tips towards the end. And I really look forward to the questions around this subject. If we don't breathe, we'll be dead in a few minutes. And compare that to water or other liquids. If we don't drink, we'll die in about several weeks. And compare that to food. If you don't eat for weeks or months, usually months, we'll die. It's only in a few minutes that we'll actually die if we don't breathe. So hopefully I've won you over with the concept of breathing is the most important thing we do to keep alive, and therefore the greatest tool of helping you on this chronic pain journey.
I'm trying to get.
So before we dive into, well, how do you breathe optimally? What are the exercises we can do? Is to bring an awareness first. Because if you have an awareness of your breathing, you can change it.
It's so hard. I have like all of them.
My son is talking to himself. Doing his exercise for his homework. Okay, so first we're going to learn to relax. Because the relaxation response in the body is the opposite of the fight-flight response, the pain response. So how do we do that? Let's break the body down into three basic components. You got the physical, you got the mental, you got the emotional. So physically, I'd encourage you to slow down and to stop sometimes and reflect and to breathe. We're all busy in our life. We're all doing so many things. And when we just physically slow down and breathe, we literally can start to relax our body and help the blood flow. I was just on a call with somebody today and I was talking about this and she was saying, well, you know, I have physically slowed down for 4 years. My body's been much slower. I'm not able to do this and the next thing. And it was very apparent by talking to her that her mind hadn't slowed down. Her mind was just going fast, fast, fast. The term monkey mind come to my mind. It was described of me many, many years ago. So slow down the monkey mind. Be aware of our thoughts and breathe. And the third way emotionally is when we have these emotions that are maybe overwhelming. Just sit and embrace. Just be with them. Just breathe through it. Allow the emotions to be. So by looking at the physical body, by looking at the mental body, by looking at the emotional body, we can literally slow down and change it and become conscious, become aware, return to our breath, and our breath can really help us through this. So as mentioned, this will help the relaxation response in the body. So physiologically, what happens? Well, if you breathe slowly, then your heart rate will drop. If your heart rate drops, then there'll be more blood shunted out to your tissues, into your skin, and into your muscles. And as a result, the tension would reduce. And what happens with chronic pain is tension accompanies it. You cannot remove tension from chronic pain. It's there. It's like in the body. It's in the muscles. It's in the layer of fascia. You see it with people with their shoulders up high like this. They're tense. And often the knots can be felt by yourself in the trapezius muscles up here and other areas, especially if it's really intense pain. So all this can be changed by you, by being aware of your breath and getting a switch that's going to go on for relaxation and at the same time off for fight-flight response. Now there's a line that you could draw between the fight-flight response over here and the relaxation response. And in truth, both are working all the time, but we want to have more and more relaxation. Because what happens in the busyness of our life and our brain is shut down from our conscious awareness is that we just completely are in the operational mode of the fight-flight. So we're way over here at one end of the spectrum, when really we want to move towards the relaxation response. And to have that is the main switch that is operating in your life. At the end of the day, you will feel better if you're living a more relaxed life, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So how does this all happen is the big question. Well, number one thing to say is you must start here, where you are. There is no place you need to be to start. You're just simply you in all your glory. And that is where you start. Okay? Next, I would encourage you to be open and curious about this journey of learning about your breath and how you can optimize that. Openness and curiosity are the fundamental principles of mindfulness. Another one is acceptance. Accept where you are.
Okay, this is
Accept where you are. And these three things are essential as we go through this process. The fourth thing, actually, for mindfulness is self-love. And being aware of your breathing is a self-love tool. So this week, to start this process, I'd like you just to start being aware of your breathing. Just start to notice it. Listening to me right now, just think about your breath. Are you using the upper lungs? Are you using the lower lungs? Maybe using a combination. You know, paying attention to how we're breathing. Very, very important. And this week, I want you to measure how frequently do you breathe. Just sit down, relax. There's several ways to do that. You can take your pulse here in the neck. Just slide it along from your Adam's apple or larynx. You'll feel a beat coming onto your fingers. Now you can either look at the clock and count for 60 seconds, or you could count for 6 seconds and multiply by 10. If that's too difficult, you can take your radial pulse, which is the outside of your wrist. If your hand's facing out, up like this, it's the outside. Here, over here. It's less of a beat in the radial pulse. Measure it. What is your breath? Sorry, what is your heart rate? It's interesting, I was Googling what is normal heart rate, and before this talk, and the Cleveland Clinic says the normal heart rate is 12 to 20. I wonder what you think of that. 12 to 20 breaths a minute. And in all honesty, I think that's a reflection of our normal society, which is in the fight-flight response. And therefore, it will go higher. Because when you relax and you breathe less, you are, when you relax and you breathe slower, your heart rate will go down. So by checking your pulse and by measuring your breath rate, you can do exactly the same thing. Count the breaths for a minute or count them for 6 seconds and multiply by 10. If that doesn't work out too well for you, you could, you can measure it for 10 seconds and multiply by 6 and just do the math, or not to try and confuse you, but 15 seconds multiplied by 4, 30 seconds multiplied by 2. So you got your breath rate and actually you've got your heart rate. So the two are kind of combined. So measure your breath rate. I think should be anything from approximately 6 to 12 because your heart rate is slower. Your heart rate is slower. Your breathing will be less. So, if you have any questions around that, ask me. Okay. So I've entitled the next little section as a daily planner, and I'm going to say a lot of things right now. And I'd like you to use this webinar and come back to it and try different things. It's impossible to run through all these things and expect anybody to do them. But, you may be further down the path than other people, and you can do, visualization exercise with breath, for example. Or if this is a brand new subject for you, just start at the very beginning. And my recommendation, as I work with my patients as well, is just to try one for an entire week, see how it feels, and then go on to the next one for the next week, and then the third one for the next week, and the fourth one. Some of them you'll be drawn to, go with that. Others you won't like. It's fine, just let it go. So just over the years, doing lots of breathing exercises myself, and also working with my patients around these subjects, these are the different ones I use, and hopefully they'll be helpful. They are incremental, so they get more challenging, and more openness and curiosity is required to accept them. But you just start where you are and move forward with this. So first is awareness, as we've been mentioning so far. Just be aware of your breath. Depending on what you're doing through the day, just pause and be aware. Okay, you can measure your breath, and you could see how your breath is when you exercise. How is it when you're lying in bed? Maybe it's very different. It will be very different. You get stressed or anxious or worried about some things, or you're managing your kids' behavior at home, like I am doing these days. It will change. So that's the first thing, awareness. Second thing, every hour, pause for 3 breaths and consciously breathe. So you could start this with just watching your breath. How am I breathing right now? That's a really good way to do it. Or you just inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. For about the same duration. We're thinking 3, 4, 5 seconds to do that. This will start to change your physiology. And if you do this regularly, every hour, or between activities, if you're a busy person, then you'll start to train your nervous system into this relaxation response. The next one, number 3, would be sit for 5 minutes and do these breathing exercises. You could sit for 5 minutes and just be aware of your breath. You could extend it to 20 minutes. Or you could consciously breathe in for 5 and out for 5 for that duration of time. Now, this will start to relax you, and you'll start to feel better. The next one is learning abdominal breathing. I like to call it belly breathing, because you're using your diaphragm. You're pulling your diaphragm down as you inhale. So you're breathing in through the top part of the lungs and down into the lower half of the lungs. So lots of YouTube videos are available on this. You could Google it and just spend some time learning how to belly breathe. And as you do your breathing through the day, incorporate that as your style of breathing. And my hope, eventually, we would all be belly breathing all the time. But that takes a long time. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate, self-loving. Don't be judgmental. Just take your time. Another way of doing breathing is to exhale for longer than the inhale. So you can maybe breathe in through your nose for 3 or 4, and then exhale for maybe 6. If you're going to do this one, make sure you're sitting down or lying down. I wouldn't recommend this doing standing up if you're doing other activities. And what happens in this activity is not only are you calming your body, but you're increasing the dilatation of your blood vessels to your tissues. And this is really important because the more carbon dioxide there is around your tissues, you're literally allowing the blood vessels to open up. And as a result, you get more oxygen into the cells. So really good tip, longer exhale that will help vasodilate or open up your blood vessels and help the oxygen carbon dioxide transfer. And at the same time, you get slightly higher carbon dioxide into the body and into the blood vessels. Another approach is box breathing. So this is where you have an inhalation and then you pause, an exhalation, you pause, and then an inhalation again. one good way of doing this is look at a window or a door. So you track your eyes. I'm just looking at beyond this camera as a window. So I'm just going to look at my left or your right, top left or top right for you. And you just breathe in. So as you look down the window or the door frame, you inhale. And then you pause and you track your vision along the bottom. You're holding your breath. And then you exhale as you track your vision up to the top. And then you hold your breath as you track your vision along to the starting point. Very good technique for anxiety, for stress, and also for chronic pain. Another one I use myself and also encourage my patients is visualization. So visualizing bringing the air, so you've got a sore lower back or painful lower back. You breathe in and you visualize with your mind the air going to your back. So down to your lower back. And as you exhale, visualize it coming out through your breath. So in with the air to your painful area and out with the pain through your breath. And you can do that for 5-10 minutes if you've got severe pain. Very helpful, very powerful. Another one is white light. Visualize white light coming in to your painful area and then exhale your pain away. Another one is use green light. Green light is a healing color and very powerful, something I've used over the years, but using color as part of the visualization exercises. So same type of exercise, but using green light. So overall, the goal is to bring awareness into your breathing as you go through your day. And this is the key to changing the autonomic nervous system and the fight-flight response to the relaxation response. Awareness is the starting point that will create this change. And the reality is we're always going to be breathing, and therefore an opportunity to continually practice this. Please be kind to yourself on this journey with this. There's no final destination here. It's just how you're doing each day, each moment. And the more you can do it, the more you take an interest in it. And I would also add writing down, like I mentioned with the habits, writing things down, tracking it. Really important to see how you're getting on with this. So in your journal, pull it out, make a documentation with your breathing. So that's it. That's the webinar today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please listen to it several times. There's a lot of information in here, especially the last section on a daily planner and how you're going to do it. Choose one and reflect back on it and monitor yourself. Become your own investigator. How is it actually working out for you? Because everybody will be different and there's no rights or wrongs here. It's just trial and error. Try, test it, reflect on it, improve, repeat and rinse. So I look forward to your questions and you have a great day.